We're not recording, are we, by the way? As I'm discussing my friends. Oh my God.
We won't run into it.
I love them all. I love their movies, all of them. I love everybody. I have never heard anyone talk about that, but with Star Wars. But I think as a child, it had a lot to do with my ideas I was forming about sensible boyfriends and relationships. Was watching Star Wars. You know.
So were you? Does that mean you were a Han person or a Luke person?
Oh, let's change the subject. It's much too personal.
Okay. So you go into people's lives, you go in deep into their inner psyche, and yet it's too personal for you to talk about Han Solo.
It's too personal to talk about me, baby. I wouldn't let anyone make a documentary about me. Are you kidding?
Really?
I love my
like 20 years from now, we got another, got a few Academy Awards under your belt, and somebody wants to make a documentary about you.
I don't think I'm interesting enough. I think the people in my films are much more interesting than me. And I think you need to be very interesting to have a film made about you, and also very, very candid. And I would love to think that I am that. But I think it's really hard. I think the people in my films, to the extent that the films are good, it's because the people in the films are really, they're just opening their nerves for our,
So how do you know that's going to happen?
When
you make a choice about doing a film, how do you know they're going to let you in?
That's an excellent question. I had real trouble with Countdown to Zero, sort of finding some exposed flesh, because it's such a sensitive topic that everything is so euphemistic and well guarded, and the weapons and even our language, we're using euphemisms like deterrent and capability and so on. And I don't know, I blunder around and I can look back and think, oh gosh, I've made 4 films, all of which I love. Maybe I haven't messed up everything. But at the time you're just sort of messing around in there and trying to do the best you can. And really being impressed with the people in my films. I can't tell you. And there are people that don't make the cut, and it's usually because they don't have the guts the courage to be as honest. It's just the honesty, which people are opening themselves. That's exactly what the audience is. I think that's the energy, isn't it? The honest. It's the honest getting to know. Do
you think they know? I mean, in a movie like Wasteland, there are people who are literally living in garbage on some level, and I mean, do they realize that you're capturing their souls on film?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, some people, Moby had a fantastic conversation. Moby did the music and is an incredibly genius guy. Was talking about how they had less media savvy and it was really, really candid. And certainly working with Amish kids, they had less media savvy. I had to stop filming somebody who I thought I'd done a really good, this was sort of the beginning of the project, but I thought I'd done a really good job explaining everything about the filming and the implications and the permission. They signed a release form and it was great. And then they said, what's this documentary going to be called and can I get it from the library? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, will it be, how many pages will it have or something like this? And I was thinking, wait a second. And he thought it was a book. I mean, you had to be, so I was like, okay, I've got to explain this better. I've got to deal with people that don't know a documentary is a film and it gets watched on TV, DVD.
So did you go through that again with them?
I did, and then unfortunately I had to discard all the footage because he felt the bishop wouldn't have liked it. And it was very heartbreaking in that instance because I had amazing footage, including an amazing interview in which he talked about wanting to leave every day and why, and was crying. And he was a very interesting guy and being very, very honest. And it was supremely compelling footage. But you can't, I mean, even in this case, it was like the joke extreme example that he was going to be excommunicated, by his bishop potentially if he couldn't defend himself. And he was in a strict church district where filming was prohibited. And he couldn't find a way that was compatible. Some church districts it was more compatible, and or if they were doing certain activities, it was okay. And we always worked with people to make sure that they weren't compromising their eternal life to be in the movie.
Which you think is unusual for a
but just backtracking, like just having to be exactly clear about that point. Oh boy, we discarded that footage, and I would never, even though I had a signed release form and everything like that. I mean, I think you have to be. You can win a few battles if you mess people around or deceive people, but I don't think you ever win the war. And I think it's the only thing that you can, I mean, it's not the only thing, I think you have to offer complete trust and faith, and it's always worked out better for me in the end, in the long run. The long game is always the only way to be is absolutely honest and have no limit to the respect with which you're working with people, because it's their lives,
So do you think that that's normal these days, or do you think that the culture has changed in that regard? I mean,
I don't know, but I do think that's also part of how you get people to be honest, is having such a safe space for them that and one of my tricks as well is telling people that you can always cut things out afterwards, but don't tell me to cut before.
Right.
Because most people, they'll start tearing up, or they're about to shout at somebody or throw up, and the instinct, of course, is to call cut. Something ugly is happening. Don't want to film that. But usually that's exactly when you want to be rolling the camera. And in hindsight, everyone's going to agree that was the interesting, important moment. So it's very important that they don't feel that they have to reach out and cut, but they do need the control or the confidence to be able to say afterwards that they can not include it in the movie. And I've never had people call me on that. I've never had people cut afterwards.
Right.
It's a funny arrangement, but it seems to work.
Well, I feel the same way about this, actually, because you already were saying something on camera earlier that was personal and not really meant for this.
Oh, there you go. That's right.
And, if it's something that I think you would think was embarrassing, I would never run it.
Oh, that's true.
Because I just don't think it's appropriate. Certainly not for this format either. I mean, it's not. This is not a hard-hitting documentary style.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's true.
Trying to expose Watergate or anything.
Yeah, it's true.
On the other hand, if you make a funny face, or say something that's particularly outlandish, that's part of the course of it. Yeah. I think that's compelling and worthwhile and kind of the point.
Yes.
So it's an interesting balance between the two.
Yeah, it's true. You have to be interesting, and it is, exactly.
So do you have a take on one of your competitors, which has become a controversy again, is this exit to the gift shop conversation, about whether it's real or whether it's manipulated or whether it's,
Gosh, it's a bit close to home to comment on my exact competitors. There's lots of controversies, aren't there, in the documentary category in a way this year, or there's a few I can think of, but
is there a difference?
Films. I have to say, the only important thing that I would say is, oh my goodness, to be on the shortlist this year is such an honor, more than ever before. I am bursting with pride. This was some fearsome documentary year, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's this age that we're living in where we now have cheap cameras that are fantastic and blowable up through fantastic technology to big screen, and fantastic non-linear editing, which particularly for documentaries, when you're constructing stories in the editing room out of piles of footage, is it's possible now to do so much more, just narratively and dramatically, and just in terms of the control you can have in crafting a film in the edit room, which is what you're sort of stuck with doing generally in documentaries. All this amazing stuff, technologically, and I also think in terms of the confidence we've gotten from all this fantastic filmmaking of the past few years, the confidence of Hoop Dreams showing us that reality can have twists and turns, and all the rest of it. I think that we're really at this moment where there's so many amazing films. When I just look at the shortlist, it blows me away how many amazingly strong films, including Exit, which I think is such an interesting film, and there's so many strong arguments, up, down, and sideways about that movie. It's very interesting.
Well, nobody seems to have any firm answers to say that it's not. I mean, there are all these theories going on, but they're not necessarily firm.
I know. I had a very interesting conversation. I was at high school with an artist who is rep by the same gallerist, and I had to take a 6 a.m. flight out of Miami and wound up with a bunch of drunk artists at 5 a.m. because Wasteland was the film at Art Basel, and I felt like I got a bunch of English blokes wasted at 5 a.m. who were professional friends, and they were being seemingly, but who knows how extensive this ruse could be, or extensive the different layers of interesting, creative, artistic, fun are. But I felt like I was getting some real scoop at 5 a.m., but I certainly am not going to repeat it here.
Well, I mean, I kind of come out of it wondering, because I've spent time with the guys, and they're very insistent, and I've actually had other. The strange thing is that certain people won't still go on the record about it, like Spike Jonze, for instance, even though he, from the beginning of the controversy at Sundance, said he had nothing to do with it, but now won't make an official statement. It's like, well, if your position, either you're lying, which is possible, or or you're enjoying the controversy, or that's it's an interesting. Because it kind of eats its own young in a weird way, and unless Banksy actually comes out and says, unless there's a moment where you see all these characters together and they somehow make something newsworthy of it. I think there's an idea that speculation and controversy are friends on there. Wasn't there a brainwash show just now where the police had to be called because somebody stole a show or something, stole a painting? I still feel like there's lots of things that smell like stunts to me. Yeah. And I'm not making statements. Well, they're always doing stunts. So
exactly. The whole thing is, so it's sort of the art of the stunt. I mean,
was like the Yes Men but see, like to me, I think I look at the Yes Men documentary. I look at Michael Moore. Yeah. Is this? I mean, Michael Moore sets up his stuff and goes through it and manipulates to a certain degree. Yeah. And like, who's sitting there poking at it, going, that's not exactly real. That's not exactly truth. Yeah. And where's that line in documentary? Because as documentaries become more of an entertainment,
I know.
What's is it fair for those guys to be hung out to dry, which some people are trying to do, obviously, because they are afraid of losing. Or do they deserve to be hung out to dry because they've violated the the rules? It's like a weird.
I think it's all interesting, envelope pushing, exciting. I love, pushing the envelope, and obviously there's a tremendous responsibility, and I get defensive when I feel like people have been exploited or misled. I'll certainly there are definitely lines where I get uncomfortable, but somewhere around here I'm feeling just really excitement about the craft and.
Well, there's no victim, even if they did it. Even if it is a joke. Even the whole thing was made up.
Yeah, victimless stunts are great.
Who's the victim?
Yeah. It's all fun exploration. I like that. I think that's exciting.
Yeah. I always remember going to Sundance many years ago and seeing Blood in the Face, which was Michael Moore was involved with. It was like but he was in it, actually. And it was, they got access to a neo-Nazi camp. Oh, wow. And they all went on all the neo-Nazis were going on camera and saying things that were insane on some level, but they thought they were, teaching us the right thing to do. Much like Jesus Camp got a lot of criticism for it. Yeah. And then at Sundance, there was a lot of anger in the audience because the movie wasn't clear enough that Nazism was bad. Right. Like somehow they had made a PSA for Nazis. Right. And it's like, don't you get the joke? It's like it's so interesting. Strange disconnect. That's very interesting. Yeah, people, you can get people uncomfortable if they don't know where they're at. It is, it's so interesting. I think a lot of my best tactics are actually very sort of forensic, and one of my best trainings was my first job right out of film school. Actually, on my visa, I could only direct, was the only job I was, and I was sort of determined to stay in New York for a bit, and I managed to land right out of school. I thought on your visa card they required you to direct. Yeah, no, I was on a student visa. I was on a student visa. I thought your credit card required you to direct. Oh, well, use the credit card. I don't know if that. I don't know if that would be a silly clause in so many cases these days. But I was originally on a green card. No, on a visa before I got a green card, and I had to, as a student, be working as a director. So I was very lucky. I got a job directing Blue's Clues, the Nickelodeon TV show, crazily. So it was my first job, and what was great about it was so many things were extraordinarily fantastic training. But one thing was that
because of the way the show, they had a sort of revolutionary practice where they tested lots of aspects of the show on 3, 4, and 5-year-olds as they were developing the show at every stage, because also you had to design stuff that the kids were going to shout back, and you had to get a certain amount of kids to get the right answers. And so we used to be able to calibrate it very precisely. You used to notice that if you animated a bird, less the 3-year-olds would be able to get the quiz question, because their attention would be distracted. And I started to really be able to plot and notice exactly sort of cognitively where the audience's mind was at sort of at any moment, and sort of always think when I'm editing, especially these documentaries, about how limited people's attention spans are, and how important it is, especially with documentaries, sometimes people look different, there's too many people to even keep a track of. How do you remember that's the same person because they look a little bit like that other pretty woman or whatever it is? Right. So you have to be incredibly careful at flagging stuff, and also excising stuff, and you really have to think like a scientist with probes all over the audience's brain in terms of where their concentration actually is and what they're actually going to be able to follow, and if something gets emotional, give them the space to do that. And you can do so much of that amazing calibration, very, very fine-tuning in the edit room with people, and I think that feeling that you're taking the audience by the hand and leading them through a messy real life, but with some really shaped sort of highs and lows and dramatic sort of dimensions out of the sort of mess of reality is really something that I enjoy. And
so you tested on 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, or 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds?
I actually test a lot when I'm editing documentaries. I'll have test screens every week, and I have a whole format of written quizzes, but then group discussion, and I ask some very craftily designed questions to try and get exactly what I need to know, and that's a big part of my process. And I don't use it to manipulative ends, I hope, but using it to really manipulate the movie into being optimized. I think that's how you got to do it.
Well, the central character in your movie, Vic, he's up to he's vulnerable to the argument that he's exploiting in some ways these people. No?
I don't think he's vulnerable to the argument that he's exploiting. What's exploitation? I mean, he's paying them the same rate that they would get, and then actually he's giving them, without taking any money, an awful lot more. And I think they're extremely happy to, without exception, about being included. So when somebody talked about exploitation, and but somebody else had heard about the movie, and they asked me in a TV interview about exploitation, and I thought, I don't know, I think that what the argument between him and his wife, which is fantastic on camera, is truly about is how do you help people most responsibly, and how easy it is to do more harm than good, and how vulnerable people are, and how sensitive you have to be when you're, as he says it, messing with people's minds. And I think many people would be sensitive to his wife, actually now ex-wife's point of view, that taking someone, for example, who works in a garbage dump on a trip to the UK could perhaps be more, disruptive and disorienting and unhelpful to them than it could be, and I think they have a good argument about it, and it's a really, really juicy and good argument. But I think, all the profits have gone to the people who feel extremely excited, honored, overjoyed, vitalized by just, they really, every which way I try to look at it, and I keep, questioning everything and turning everything around from every side I possibly can, because I know I'm benefiting from this journey, but I want them to also, and that's part of the responsibility of making the film that I take very seriously. And any way I turn this up, I'm excited about the positive that's come out of it, and really notice this idea that art does seem to have had this transformative effect, and the project has brought awareness to the Catadoras as a class of people, a lot of dignity and pride, a lot of spotlight to the environmental stewardship that they, their fantastic job that they're doing for the environment, because they're actually tremendously responsible recyclers. I mean, their rate of recycling is way higher than, for example, the high-tech US rate. And they're just spectacular courage and dignity in the most kind of awful of job circumstances that they're confronted with, like sifting through this garbage juice, and just their charm and just the inspiration that they can give us all, and that's such a wonderful. I think there's so much excitement around that. There's just so many different ways. I think that the pieces themselves, everyone's involved thinks is very beautiful and are very excited about them. There's just so many different ways, apart from the Cold Hard Cash, which has all gone from Vic's studio. I don't believe took expenses. So, and I think we're going to do even another portrait to time with our UK release, because one of the catadores, the sort of Yoda of the dump, the sort of bar of the landfill, Volta, died, and they actually never made a portrait of him. They took his photograph, but then never made a portrait, and we're hoping that Vic might do another portrait for sale to raise more funds to time with the UK release. So there's loads of good stuff that continues to build and flow. And when the film gets released in Brazil shortly, I mean, they've already been changing the Brazilian garbage laws in the last month or two, and I just all think it's a beautiful thing. And I really so if people say, well, you're exploitative, I think, no, there's lots of really good arguments you can have about how best to help people. But I don't think it's as severe as exploiting. I think it's more about how best to help and how easy it is to get that wrong. But I don't think there's any actual risk in this movie of anyone feeling exploited.
It's always an interesting thing about perspective, because you get into that. I mean, the movie's been compared in some ways to Slumdog Millionaire by some people. And in fact, there were people...
I love that movie.
And there were people who hated that movie because they felt it was faux India, and that Danny had somehow taken advantage of real pain in India and made it into an entertainment of some kind. And that was bad.
That's
right. But on some level, still, I mean, like, how does any artist? I mean, ultimately, anything that's a representational art is exploitative on some level. I mean, it is. You're using somebody's emotion, or you're using your own emotion to get to an end, which is not necessarily financial. Not necessarily anything other than art.
I think it is the wisdom to know the difference, isn't it? It's all in absolutely. But this one I feel really good about. I feel really, really, I keep sort of thinking, maybe this is the best thing I ever did, as a human being, even if not as a filmmaker. I feel really excited about it. It's a really good feeling. I think we all feel, working on the movie, honestly, quite recycled by the whole process in our own spirits. It's we all went through sort of all this sort of grief and loss, and we all went through sort of like personal trials, I would say. Somehow making the movie, everyone involved seems to have had quite a challenging chunk of life. And so it's been a real, that we've sort of felt like this movie has been our treasure in the trash of our life, if you know what I mean. That it has been recycling of us too, and thank goodness for that.
So did you start with Vic? Was that where you began this journey for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Start with liking Vic's work, particularly his Pictures of Junk series, because it had the same play with scale, which I think is really visual and really cinematic, and I hadn't quite seen before, so I was just struck by that sort of as a sort of just sucked in as a sort of eye experience, visual sort of fun, because he does this thing where he uses loads of different objects to create something else, so you're looking closer to see the objects but looking far away to see the whole. And I think that speaks to me a lot as well about, when you're constructing a film, you're involved in these little moments and details, but you're constructing something larger out of very small units, and you're also starting out very far away from people, but you're trying to get very close. It's just lots of sort of fun analogies, which I think really resonate with. Anyway, so I loved that. I happened to be obsessed with garbage because 10 years ago when I was at NYU and in the triathlon club, there was a brilliant person who was teaching this crazy interdisciplinary seminar about garbage. And I started auditing, just sitting in to watch some movies that were quite hard to find. Like this Brazilian short film, La Ilha das Flores, which is a short film that's very fun, short, about the life cycle of a tomato, sort of like from sort of being grown to garbage dump. That happened to be set in Brazil. Anyways, I thought it was a cool short film. And then this class was going off to visit a landfill, and I was invited along. And I thought, wow, how fascinating. And just as a lark, I went along, and suddenly when I got there, I sort of got hit through the nose and the gut with this idea that everything I'd ever thrown away since I lived in New York had not vanished, as somehow, our society kind of contrives to pretend, because it just sort of, garbage is one of the most seamless operations of our lives. That stuff just goes, right? We have to take it out, but really they take it away. It's such an effortless thing getting rid of our waste. And
another dichotomy in that we now know how good the mafia is at the job.
Oh, there you go.
That they're worth keeping around because they're really good at that business.
There you go. Oh my goodness. And no comment. So, actually, but one of the things we had to be very challenged by when we were making the movie was originally. So I'll get back to the mafia, but so I'd met Vic, and I had been obsessed with garbage, and we were just talking very, very loosely about how we might make a film. And I had this idea that we should follow one project, a new project, from the very beginning. And we talked about what that might be, and I really was very excited about the pictures of junk, and said, have you ever worked with garbage? And he said, yes, but it's too difficult because of the gangs, actually, that control the garbage in Brazil. It's super scary. There was a journalist who'd gone in with a camera and been necklaced. They had put a tie around his neck and set fire to it. This was not something I wanted to do to myself or a crew. So I was very scared, as Vic had been. But I knew that it would be a really interesting location because I'd been to a landfill and had this amazing realization, and also it was just really cool looking as a location. It was just actually a brilliantly visual place. Bits of garbage everywhere, that sort of mosaic of stuff that could be yours, and all these birds and all these flapping plastic bags and the chain link fence. I mean, it was a it's a true life horror movie. A landfill, it really is, and it smells worse than any horror movie, as well. So, I knew that was the good idea. And I guess on some sort of naughty level, I also knew that the danger was part of the drama, but obviously there was a line, because safety does come first in a big way. But if there was a way of finding a safe landfill to work in, and if Vic was ever going to do this project in a garbage dump, and I knew about the cataduras, I just instantly saw that was the sort of unique alignment in which a film about Vic Muniz would be not just my next film, but a really good one.
So did you know enough about the cataduras to know that you had characters?
No,
ultimately the movie's built around 5 or 6 characters.
As a human being, I knew that for your life to go to Jardim Gramacho, which is this largest landfill in the world, which geographically almost looks like a tumor or something, because it's got the road, but it's almost like a little island. It sort of is. It's surrounded by marshes, so it's sort of like this tumor. It's just sort of this sort of promontory with just one little road that connects it to the mainland. And I knew that if your life took you over that bridge into Gramacho Gardens, Jardim Gramacho, the largest landfill in the world, to sift through recyclable materials for a living, I knew your life had to be dramatic. And I also knew that people who I am firmly of the opinion that people who wind up in difficult places have usually had really difficult things happen to them, and I think it can be the most fantastic thing that documentaries can do, is to remind ourselves that people who having really confronting really tough lives, tragically are often really victims of terrible tragedies, and not sort of strange, bad people unlike us at all. They're just there, but for the grace of God go I. I think that's something that's just foundational for me, and so I knew that their lives were going to have been difficult and dramatic and interesting and probably really rewarding to meet. But I actually have to say I thought it'd be a lot harder. I thought they'd have mental health problems. I thought they'd be difficult to deal with. I thought, I mean, without sort of judging that, I just expected it to be much sort of grimmer, tougher, crazier, scarier time. And then you get there and you sort of discover, like, you know, the world's most impressive autodidact. I mean, Tiao picked Machiavelli's Prince out of the garbage, dried it off, all that garbage juice, you know, and felt like reading it, and decided he wanted to learn about leadership, and then set up his, set up his co-op and took leadership lessons from this text, which I went to Oxford as an undergraduate, and we all referenced Machiavelli's The Prince with great undergraduate aplomb, but none of us read the thing, you know, and said anything original. At least I strive to say original things, but I doubt many people did, or I doubt I achieved it very often. And and here's this guy who hasn't been to school in his life and has been actually working in a garbage dump since the age of 11. Taught himself to read it, and also makes this incredibly astute comparison between Florence, 16th century Florence, with the individually fortified sort of fiefdoms and all these sort of rival power structures. I was actually just in Florence, actually screening our Italian premiere was at this fantastic La Schema dell'Arte in Florence film festival, and they couldn't believe it. You know that someone would compare Machiavelli to present day Rio. It's a brilliant comparison. It's actually the most brilliant original piece of thinking, and this is this guy. And then meantime there's Irma, who's cooking using all the sell-by produce, using the gas that's outgassed from the garbage dump and utensils she gets from the garbage, and providing this nutrition. I mean, it's just sort of mythic fairy tale stuff. Or like Shakespeare got there first and made these characters so incredibly inspiring. Zumbi doesn't just recycle the paper, he takes the books out of the garbage and gives them, has this lending library. I mean, their resourcefulness is mind-blowing. And there's Volta, who just, puts you to shame. I mean, he's just sort of the most the most powerful teacher I've had in my life. And the first moment I saw him was the first day I went to the dump was before even Vic had gone there. I'd gone to scout it out and try to figure out what I needed crew and equipment wise to shoot there, and I was entering the dump, and he cycled down the hill towards me, flashed me a peace sign, honked his horn. I noticed that his bicycle had all these trinkets that he'd recovered from the garbage, and just has this kind of cool look and this incredibly charming, bright smile. And he grinned at me, and I suddenly realized that I wasn't going to be dealing with scary monsters. And Vic, we'd been filming Vic saying this is where everything that's not good goes, including the people, and his assistant saying, yes, it's going to be really, really hard, but we're going to give it a go to help these people. And they were all absolutely terrified. Then you meet these people, and it's like, the cast of your, friendliest TV show. I mean, there's just like the Muppets, but it's the most beautiful, alive bunch of laughing people you can imagine. You think, oh my God! I mean, I couldn't find this much joy and spirit in any office I've ever worked in. And so suddenly that was the big reveal to me. Was like, oh, the coolest people I've ever met. Wasn't banking on that, and it's true that they have had all this drama. But what's so interesting about it is that there's some really brought out the best in people, and there's something about the film that's able to get at that. But that's not simple either, because actually there are real, at one point Tiao cries and gives up hope, and suffers this terrible crime, and this is what being poor is like. You're more likely to be a victim of crime than when you're rich, and boy, it's tough. And so this, there's so much fantastic richness to be found there. But I knew that it was going to be. I knew it was going to be interesting. I didn't know it was going to be like so. I guess vibrant, inspiring side of the dial. I was expecting more sort of the. I mean, I don't know how people could cry more. I worry about people that don't cry in the movie. I mean, everyone, I think, has confessed to either crying or tearing up. I would worry about someone if they don't tear up, because it's very emotional, and it is sort of a kind of, as Moby says, a sort of heart-opening exercise. It's a real emotional workout watching the movie, which I'm very, very proud of. So I don't know how it would have been more emotional, but somehow And I love films like that. There's a documentary, The Farm, about these, do you know that one, about these long-term prisoners who you wind up thinking are so much more sort of graceful than any of the people in the system that have imprisoned them. And that I find that stuff very, very moving.
There's something about resurrection that's more powerful than loss.
That's right.
I think that's the thing that's inspiring about a lot. I mean, I think it's kind of a theme this year in a lot of movies, features as well.
Recycling?
Resurrection.
Resurrection. Okay, like which film?
Well, recycling is resurrection in a way.
No, it absolutely is. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly in The Fighter, and it's certainly in 127 Hours, where he essentially has to die to live.
To see these films. I've been too busy. I haven't seen them yet.
And Black Swan, which is really about her getting past, and dying to live. In my opinion. I mean, I think the ending is different than I think it is, but whatever.
Right.
But it's something that that you have to get to that place of darkness to stand up.
Which I think is sort of, maybe that's what we are confronting in as a culture right now. It's testing times for us all, isn't it, in the world? And the hope is that we rise to that challenge and renew ourselves, come back stronger and better and clearer and kinder.
So where does this leave you at the end of it? I mean, you've now...
A bit tired.
But you have all this success with it, and there's a lot of attention
it's so wonderful. I'm so thrilled. It's such an honor to sort of introduce audiences to the people in the movie. And Volta says this fantastic thing, 99 is not 100, which maybe doesn't make that much sense since you've seen the movie, but at the risk of not making much sense, it's this fantastic Portuguese saying 99 is not 100, by which he means every single can recycled makes all the difference. Every single act, every single thing that we say or do makes all the difference. And when you sort of, the movie does that for me, it reminds me that, one man's art project, his crazy idea, can art transform lives? And each of the sort of things that the people in the movie have chosen to do as they've sort of faced their challenges in their lives have made all the difference. And so the film is this fantastic sort of metaphor, I think, for that and the possibility of making a difference. You see it, and one of the fun things is that you see it from the very beginning, because we had this unique sort of collaboration with Vic, that we got to film unfolding Verite style really from the very, very, very beginning. And so you really see the before, which I think really makes the after pay off so marvelously. So there's just been such a joy to share this with audiences, and it is so emotional and interesting.
So does the after take you further into it, or does it start to separate you from it?
What's that?
Does all this traveling with it, showing it to other audiences, being in foreign countries, and getting great acclaim, an Academy Award nomination potentially, and the short list certainly, obviously, and does that separate you from it, or does it take you further into it?
For me, it's all part of the process and the journey, for sure. It's actually integral. I mean, and you go on a real journey with the people in the movie, and it's been delightful to have sort of Tiao, for example, and at some screenings. Well, there was one screening in Berlin where the moderator was crying, I was crying, Tiao was crying, the audience was crying, everyone was howling. It was so emotional. And as I said, we're able to do this new sale of a new portrait at a time with our UK release. So the work very much goes on, the relationships go on. Vic is always laughing that people keep calling him up and asking about garbage, and then when he moans about that to the Catadoras, they say, well, people are all now calling us up to ask us about art. And and so there's just loads of fun stuff like that. And no, for me, it's honestly a joy and a privilege, and it's so. I joke as well that it's a documentary about garbage in Portuguese, and that's not quite true. It's obviously a documentary about the transformative power of art and the brilliant people, involved in this unique, human story of uplifting and marvelousness, featuring Vic Muniz and these fantastic band of Catadoras. So there's different ways of putting it, but really, and it's not all in Portuguese. But my goodness, we're in theatres in Poland. I mean, all over the world. We've won, I think, I could boast, but we've won like 26 prizes and been nominated for more. It's amazing. I keep thinking maybe I died and went to filmmaker heaven. This is my version of heaven playing out right now. Actually, I'm long dead, and this is just me like rolling the heaven reel.
So how do you move on to the next thing?
Well, for me, how do you move on to the next thing? I mean, for me, these things are big journeys, and I don't rush them, and I don't trust myself to do a good job if I did. And I've been developing some projects, but it is a bit like falling in love. Like, you know, you must beware not to think like I want to start now and just go, because it may not be good enough. And my biggest concern, I think, about documentaries is that you really need a good thing or it's not worth it. I see many friends that struggle with material that no matter how brilliant they are, because they're more brilliant than me, that it's just never going to yield so interestingly as to make a film, I think. So I'm very careful about what I get involved in, which makes for a very boring answer to that question about what I'm doing next, because the truth is I'm sort of if I said that on a deep level I needed time to figure out, you know, to figure out what I think about the world in order to best, you know, these things are somewhat, you need to feel clear about how you think about things before you can, say anything. And in a deep way looking for what it is that's worth saying in this day and age with my precious short life. And maybe I didn't find anything yet. There's a great quote, but I'm spacing out on what that, who said something about, I can't remember it all. John Cage, something about I have nothing to say and I'm saying it, or something like that. Like, I don't know, something like that. Maybe that's where I'm at right now. And actually also just that it does take a lot of work to put the movie out, and I'm really grateful. We have an amazing distributor with Art House. It's all very like done for love, but we're being released in all these different countries, and you really want to just make sure. And
well, can you be in love with two projects at the same time, or do you have to wait till you get over this romance to move on to the next one?
I mean, I think Countdown, I feel like I had twins this year, you know, because they literally were born the same, one day apart at Sundance. They premiered subsequent days at Sundance. So I had twins this year. So they're both like, you know, still, I think we're weaning right now. We're in the weaning process. It's definitely less crazy. But I'm getting hungry to do something else. I'm figuring it out. I love narrative too. I mean, I started out as a narrative filmmaker. Ironically, it's starting to look awfully like I'm a documentary filmmaker, but that is not, hilariously, you know, that was never the plan. It's always just been clearly the best things about life are not the things you're actually trying to do at all, but the things that sneak up on you in time, right? So.
We talked to Andrew Jarecki, who made a documentary in the process of making his first narrative. Basically made a documentary about these people and used that as a template. The
Capturing the Freedmans, you mean?
Well, he did Capturing the Freedmans, but he just had a movie come out with Kirsten Dunst and Ryan Gosling, which is based on a true story.
Right.
And he basically did a documentary. He shot all the interviews that he did with people about it to get the background and showed that to the actors, and everybody kind of participated in that, and then shot a narrative.
Oh, there you go. So interesting. I have a very funny Andrew Jarecki story, though, because Moby did the music for Wasteland, introduced me to Andrew, who needed a bit of documentary advice. This thing he was thinking about maybe doing a film about clowns, birthday party entertainers, because they were sort of kooky. And I was happily advising him on his birthday party entertaining kooky documentary film. And imagine my surprise when my advice, which was, I loved the guy and his wife, I thought they were absolutely terrific, and Moby's friends are all brilliant. So it was really fun, but I certainly didn't think I was advising somebody on the best, you know, documentary, you know, in many people's minds, one of the better documentaries of all time.
I didn't think so either, because originally it was just a clown.
Those quirky birthday party entertainers. And so I was busy advising him as best I could about that. So imagine my surprise when I went to help him out in the editing room and I saw the rough cut of Capturing the Freedmans and my jaw dropped to the floor and I was like, oh wow, never underestimate people. Wow, you know, so I think he's genius.
Well, like you, he, you know, went in one way and came out with things that he didn't expect.
I don't know. I sort of feel like mostly I do know what I mean, in some ways, Wes Anderson is actually, it's so similar to what I imagined it would be. It's a little bit different. Like it's actually, I just didn't know who the people were, and how I thought they'd be much more heart-wrenchingly difficult sort of cases.
But if that spirit was that different, the movie certainly would be very different.
In certain, like, it would be a different color, but the shape would be the same or something like that, because the structure of the journey of the artist and the portraits and the selling, I sort of, but there was definitely a wild card. I mean, also Vic had done a social project with some street kids that hadn't worked out at all. I mean, there was a risk. I needed the stakes to be high. I needed him to risk failure, and I wasn't afraid of that after Blind Sight, in which they failed to climb the mountain. So maybe it's true, maybe they don't all, you know, that was a wonderful example with my movie Blind Sight, where they all went climbing the mountain, and you know, it all fell apart like spectacularly at 23,000 feet, and it's a much better, more interesting movie because the original plan didn't work out. So maybe I don't have it all figured out after all.
Well, I guess that's the idea. It is documentary after all.
It is true. It's true. It's true.
If you had a script, it would be something else.
It's true, but you definitely need to have some confidence in certain, you know, sort of foundations of interestingness to sort of get out of bed, sort of thing.
And Moby.
What about him?
It helps to get out of bed when you know you have Moby coming.
Well, he actually came in really late. I absolutely assumed we'd have, you know, honestly, this is actually true. I absolutely assumed that we'd have Brazilian music. In fact, I've been trying to use Moby's music on Countdown, and that didn't work out. It was not going down very well with the Above the Line crowd. So that actually, I happen to absolutely love Moby's music and think it's spectacularly cinematic. But crazily, it's one of those last minute switcheroos. It's like one of the casting things. Like it was a total, and I absolutely assumed, but I couldn't find any Brazilian music that worked. And I'm very sort of, you know, hands-on. What you see, what you get. I love post-production because you can really try stuff out and really feel it out. It's very experiential. And I love music. I'm ultra picky. I used to DJ and blah, blah, blah. So I feel very sensitized and tune in and really care passionately about music in film. And I just couldn't find any Brazilian music that worked. It was all detracting or driving me crazy or just not helping. And it was a crazy sort of Hail Mary to try Moby, and I just really enjoyed it. And it's a bit like using Aphex Twin on my Amish movie. I really thought I'd be using all kinds of acoustic, you know, and then I was like, well, why don't even have any music, let alone acoustic music? Why use harmonicas when that's as against the rules as the Sex Pistols? And so sometimes I think, but I love the music. There was one hilarious, Moby came to this fantastic, our New York premiere was at MoMA, and it was an amazing screening. It was just a wonderful, wonderful screening of the movie in this wonderful theater in MoMA in New York. But lots of Brazilians were there, and and we had Moby there. It was very exciting. One of the questions was, why did he use this terrible music and not Brazilian music? And of course, Moby's the most gracious man alive. But David Byrne, my other idol, happened to be in the audience, and he said, well, it was amazing because it really universalizes the experience. And I thought that was a great way of articulating something which I had maybe been sensing, but I hadn't. But it's a very human story and cinematic, you know, experience. I hope, rather than just a sort of Brazilian, like, let's play the Brazilian music because we're in Brazil, sort of a thing.
So does it get exhausting rationalizing it after all? I mean, you obviously talked to a lot of press. You've been talking about this movie for a long time.
And actually, that's another thing that's actually kind of fun, is like, you don't know what you've gotten yet. And actually, sometimes you really make sense of it. You know, I was in Mexico showing it to a Mexican crowd. Amazing how many wonderful opportunities I've had it show to different audiences. And amazing how, just it's been so warmly received. I loved it. But in different nuances, in different nuanced ways. And in Mexico, all these beautiful young women were offering me their necklaces and really, really moved. And some people were saying that they just don't see poor people on screen portrayed, honestly, or able to use their own voice, or really seen as having sort of triumphed over this adversity in sort of quite mundane ways. And you sort of think, oh, that's true. When do you see people this cool, but this ostracized? And it was just a very interesting. And this you think, oh, actually, I that is a strength of the movie that I hadn't sort of articulated for myself. And so it's lovely. It's maybe a funny example to use. Maybe I should try and think of a better example. But I actually think it's lovely to talk to people that really get me thinking about what it is that I've done. And you learn so much about people's experience of the movie and what's working and what it is that you've done. Because it's just, like life, it takes a while to sometimes reveal or understand, or there's loads to it and it keeps unfolding and it's always different. So there's actually quite a lot to, especially this movie, because it's I think it's a lot richer than it seems. It's about art, it's about garbage, but it's quite a lot about life's twists and turns, and there's all kinds of like really fun detail in it. One of my favorite things about it, can I bore you with this, is that sometimes you just, in documentaries, you find these details you could never have scripted. Well, you could, but I wouldn't be good enough to. And you just find them, and then you can put them in the movie without even having to think them up. You can just notice them. And at the beginning, Vic and his collaborator Fabio are looking from photos taken from a helicopter, and they say, well, you're looking down, and it's like looking at little ants doing what they do all day because they feel so far away from the people. And they're talking about scale and how it's, when you're not seeing the smiles of the people, you're far away. It's very horrifying looking at these terrible favelas without sewage and with just garbage everywhere that kids are playing in barefoot. And then, so these little ants at the beginning, human beings as little ants because you're so far away from them. And then Vic slowly gets closer and closer. He goes there, gets out of the helicopter, gets out of the van, starts to talk. They start to work together. They're getting closer and closer. They're becoming friends. They're forming bonds. They're making art together. They're going through this stuff together. And then we speak to one woman, Isis, who reveals that she has watched her 3-year-old son die, and you understand so much about how her life had spiraled out of control, and she turned to drink and went up in the garbage, and her husband taken her daughter away, who she hadn't seen since her son had died, and she talks about how she'll never forget a single detail, not the ant that was on the face of her son, and she doesn't even have a photograph of him anymore because her wallet had been stolen, but she'll remember that, and you sort of feel like that's the sort of honor of the attention that you can give, and the how close you can get is not forgetting a single detail, not even the ant on the face, and that sort of zoomed in. You start out with Google Earth and the little ants, and now you're like seeing the ant and not being able to forget it. And at the very end, Vic is playing with a ant that's crawled onto a light box. He's playing with a paintbrush and some pigment, making a piece, and he's sort of pushing this ant around. And I think of that line from King Lear yes it is, as flies to the gods are we to, as flies to little boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. But this idea of sort of human beings as insects being, the gods or the big forces sort of pushing us around in our lives. And that sort of, for me, the film starts to really resonate around this idea of fortune and just life in the biggest possible grappling with, and this idea that Vic grew up in exactly the same social class as these people, and through this fantastic sequence of events, including getting shot in the leg, and he shows his scar, of course, but getting well compensated, he was able to come to the United States, and that was a big I call it snakes and ladders because I grew up in England, but you call it chutes and ladders, I think, right? And the chutes and ladders of life, that was a big ladder for him, was this payout that he got because he'd been shot very badly in the leg. And yet these other, people had different strokes of fortune, losing their parents at a very young age, and or suffering domestic violence and running away from that. And their lives had taken these very drastically opposed sort of socioeconomic turns that they'd been led to a garbage dump, recycling by hand, and that feeling of there but for the grace of God go I, there go I, or just walking in each other's shoes, and the idea that both Vic and the Catadoras were so candid and able to sort of show us what it's like to walk in their shoes, and show us also the sort of interchangeability of their paths. For me, it starts to get really interesting and very moving. So the film's about a lot of stuff, not just garbage, I promise. For people who haven't seen it and might just be thinking about going to see a film about garbage in Portuguese, it's not just that.
Excellent. I don't think it's just that either.
Thank you. What do you think it is?
It presents itself.
Well, yes, you tell me.
I think that's what it is for you. I mean, I think that's what makes you a good filmmaker, a good documentarian.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, you're waiting. You're letting it come to you.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like as much as you controlled this journey, the journey presented itself to you.
Well, you have to play to your strengths in a documentary because you've only got what you got, right?
Right.
Well, you can sometimes get what you haven't got, but
it sounds like you
still got to deal with. You got to work with the reality. You got to play to your strengths. You have to observe the strengths really well, and hopefully you've got some strengths to play, and then that's what you are cutting for in the edit.
But you don't always know what you're going to get until you've got it.
No, that's true. I didn't know I had a sort of existential meditation on like life's twists and turns, and ants and stuff. No, I didn't know that, and that is the fun of the job is and life. That's the fun of life, isn't it? Is being present and noticing stuff. Yeah.